ended up yesterday's study at the last verse of chapter 1. And we looked at part of that last verse. Now we start our reading with that same last verse, but the second part of that last verse. Nehemiah chapter 1 and verse 11b. Now I was cupbearer to the king. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" When the king said to me, "What are you requesting?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it." And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. We will look at the whole chapter in this passage, in today's study. But let's start with this statement that he was the cupbearer of the king. He was a trustworthy worker. The cupbearer in an ancient Near Eastern court was a very important position, and he had direct access to the king and great influence as a result. Later sources tell us that he may have been a wine taster also, to taste to see whether the wine was safe for the king to drink. And some writings describe him as the chief financial officer of the king's court. Now, he was from a foreign country, and it's unusual for a king to give such a high and important position to a foreigner. Obviously, he was a trusted and valued worker. I have a friend of mine who was chief executive officer of a big company in Sri Lanka. And I was chatting to him once, and he told me, he was a believer, "I will not hire born-again Christians in my company." So I asked him why. And he said, "Well, they want to go for this prayer meeting and that prayer meeting, and they don't do their job properly." And I felt so sad that he had to feel that way about Christians. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "Whether you eat or drink, do it all for the glory of God." And our jobs are part of that responsibility. Those who have not been trustworthy behind the scenes will not do well as leaders. You may have heard of this famous book by a guy called Jim Collins called Good to Great, where he studied the organizations, companies that were good and became great. And one chapter is on the profile of the leaders of those companies. And he ends up with a profile. He says his researchers were surprised. When they came up, they went and studied these companies and found that these leaders were self-effacing, servant-like leaders. So it was quite an encouraging thing for Christians to read this in a secular book. Well, Jim Collins told a person who was working for him once, "If you want to be a great leader, you must also be a great follower." Faithfulness behind the scenes prepares us for leadership. Then we come to verse 1. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. The timing is, we are not 100% sure of the dates, but probably 4 months since he started praying was when he got to go there. So he had to patiently wait for the right time. Now the time is right for him to go to the king. Nehemiah was a passionate leader. We are going to see that a lot in this study. But passion and urgency doesn't mean rushed behavior. We wait for the most opportune time to fulfill our vision. And very often, that is not the same time that we planned. 4 years ago, I stepped down from being National Director of Youth for Christ. I'm still on staff, but I'm no longer the National Director. And I was looking at my 35 years, I was reflecting at that time. And suddenly, I came to realize that most of my personal plans, I couldn't follow for myself. Most of the plans that I had, I couldn't do. But as I look back on 35 years of ministry, most of my dreams have been fulfilled. Personal dreams. Often 4 years late, 10 years late sometimes, but they were fulfilled. So we don't need to be upset by delays. We keep the passion going and keep pursuing the goal that God gave us. Prayerful waiting without losing passion is part of the art of Christian leadership. We wait for the opportune moment. Then we come to verse 2. And the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. The reason he was afraid was that he was breaking etiquette by expressing his emotions in the presence of the king. You must be happy before the king. The failure to do so was considered an insult to the crown. I had a friend who worked in Disneyland when I was a student at Fuller Seminary in California, and he was my dorm mate. And he said that he had to go around, with the people, and he had his boss who used to just come around checking on them to see whether they were smiling. And he said, "I'm sick and tired of smiling," because that was part of his job. And there are certain places where you're supposed to be in a certain way. And he was taking a bit of a risk by expressing his emotions at this time. Nehemiah chose not to act. He was going to present a difficult proposal. It was actually an amazing proposal. 12 years earlier, in Ezra chapter 4, we are told that the rebuilding of the wall was stopped by a decree of the king, because the king was told that if this wall is completed, the people are going to rebel. So, now he's going to the king, and it's a huge risk that he was taking. Just like Esther, he took the risk on behalf of his people. He was doing very well. He had a comfortable job. He didn't have to go. This would be a tough job for him to do, and he could lose everything by going. He could even be killed. Yet leaders with a vision from God are willing to risk their lives and give up everything to follow that vision. They are not satisfied to lie inactive in their comfort zone when God has told them to go somewhere that is difficult to go. I think of people who go to start new churches, or brilliant preachers who go to the unreached. We think that brilliant preachers should have a crowd of 1,000 people in their congregation. And this poor guy who has gone to the unreached has 3 people: his spouse and his co-worker on Sunday for a long time. But that's part of responding to the call of God. For example, even in an office, when somebody is badly treated, and you feel that you need to go and tell the boss, there's great fear. Will he take revenge on me? Or if it's in the church, the fear is that he will give a hint on his next Sunday sermon about you. And so people say, we'll just keep quiet. And how much evil has gone on unchecked because good people didn't speak up. Nehemiah was willing to take the risk and go to the king. Then we come to verse 3. And I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? You know, his response is a wise response, just like that of Esther. Let the king live forever was a common formula when addressing the king. It was an expression of loyalty. But it's very interesting how he presents this issue. He doesn't present it as a political issue. Because the king has already given a decree, a political decree, stop this. So, if he presented it as a political issue, it could be understood as rebellion. Therefore, it was a complicated thing that he had to present. So he presents it as a personal issue. The city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins. The New American Commentary on this calls it delicate diplomacy, how he goes and presents this. He first had to get the king's sympathy before going on to the details. Proverbs 19:2 says, desire or zeal without knowledge is not good. How much more will hasty feet miss the way? So this was zeal with wisdom. Verse 4. Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. He slips in a prayer before responding to the king's question. We can call these flash prayers. And this is a very important aspect of the book of Nehemiah. You find it 11 times. 11 times you find Nehemiah slipping in to prayer. And for it to come 11 times, obviously it's a key to understanding the type of person Nehemiah was. He had already spent a long time fasting and praying. And those who spend time alone with God will naturally slip into prayer in a situation they face because they are in tune with God. You know, there are some people who say, I don't have a specific time. I pray all the time. I don't think that's the biblical pattern. The biblical pattern doesn't prescribe detailed pattern for us. But people did spend time alone with God. That's what we see. And time alone keeps us in touch with God. If you're not in touch with God, you may forget to pray in a difficult situation. What it does is, it's a way to open ourselves to God's guidance. When we talk to Him, He can talk to us. And God is a God who answers our prayer. It's also a way to affirm God's lordship in this situation. And that moderates our behavior. When we know that God is in this, we are moderated. Our behavior is moderated. He acts like an umpire to our behavior. For example, you can't use obscene language in an argument if you know that God is around there and is part of the conversation. Then these flash prayers give us security so that we know that God is with us. Therefore, we won't act rashly in a crisis. We especially need God's guidance and restraint in difficult situations like this one. You know, in Acts 13, very interesting thing is said about Paul in Cyprus. The proconsul, Sergius Paulus, is very interested in the message. And Elymas, a Jewish sorcerer, is trying to hinder him. And Paul rebukes him and he goes blind for a season. But very interestingly, it says, Paul, filled with the Spirit, spoke. So we need the fullness of the Spirit even for rebuking. Parents need it when they scold their children. Sometimes we take leave from God and say, I want to go and scold my child and come back to you. But we need it in a crisis. So whenever we face a crisis, we must learn to first pray, to bring God into it. I've been married a little over, about 38 and a half years. And for this long period, we have had a principle that we won't go back to sleep if we have a problem until we have come to an agreement using this idea of let not the sun go down on your wrath. And in the first few years of our marriage, this was quite a challenge because my wife and I have very different personalities. And I remember she said early in our marriage, "You're not the person we see on the pulpit," you know. And it was quite a challenge. We had to talk. And so sometimes we'll be talking till 1, 2 in the morning, which is not a problem to me because I'm a night person, but my wife is an early morning person. And during these debates or love fights, as we can call them, I developed, I learned something that really helped me. With my mouth, I'm speaking to her. With my ears, I'm listening to her. In my heart, I'm talking to God. And what am I saying? Please God, please God, please God, help, 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 help. We bring in God right into this difficult situation, and He moderates the situation for us. So, He has a flash prayer, one of 11 in this book. Then we come to verse 5. And then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it." You can see how he speaks. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight. He speaks respectfully because he recognizes the king's authority, and always Christians respect authority. This is something that we are told in the New Testament regarding our dealings with authorities in society. Romans 13:7, talking about society, says, "Give respect to those whom respect is due owed, and honor to those to whom honor is owed." 1 Peter 2:18 is even more explicit. It says, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust." We are to treat them with respect. Daniel was a good example of firm resolve combined with polite respect. That's the way he went about his work. People have been given responsibility to keep society going. And Romans 13 describes them as God's agents. And we respect it. You know, sometimes we have visionary leaders who bulldoze their way to achieve their ends. And they break cultural protocol in the process of doing so. And what happens is they may get their thing done, but there's a lot of what we may call collateral damage. And it closes the door for future projects because of the way he did this first project. Nehemiah was a successful visionary, but he was also wise and respectful. Now we come to verses 6 to 10. It says, "And the king said to me," the queen sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone? And when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through it until I come to Judah. And the letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of God, of my God, was upon me. What you see here is careful prior planning. The major hurdle has been cleared. The king has okayed the project, and he had won the king's trust by his faithfulness. And you know, when you're a faithful worker, very often our bosses are willing to make an exception and release us for some outrageous plan that we have, because we have won their trust. But he makes some practical requests. He asks for letters to the governors to pass through. Nehemiah would have prepared, knowing the possible obstacles, and he was ready with all the requests that were needed related to the project. He asked for letters to prevent prohibition by authorities, and this is a sign that he had well planned his strategy before he came. Many great ideas are never completed because they are not accompanied by careful planning. I was a leader of an organization for 35 years, and I'm a preacher, one who lives in this world, and a terrible planner, terrible organizer. And the only way I could survive was by making sure that others did what I couldn't. But if you're a leader and you're not a good planner like me, you have to get somebody to do it, because we have to plan. And without that, good projects can end in this disaster. Then verse 8 says, he wanted a letter to the keeper of the forest, asking for wood. And Nehemiah knows his name. His name is Asaph, which is a Hebrew name. So he must have been a Jew who had risen to a high place, and Nehemiah could count on his support. How important for Christians to go into the structures of society, and how much they can do by doing so. Esther was a good example of this. And when leaders go into these prominent places, there are some Christians who are waiting for them to make a mistake. And they relish the experience of recounting the mistakes that these people have done, people who have gone into politics and things like that. See how he has compromised his faith. That's the way we talk. All of us make mistakes. And people in prominent places, their mistakes are prominent. And so, small people thrive on publicizing the mistakes of Christians in difficult places. They should pray for them instead, rather than criticize them. We need God's people in the structures of society. Now he asks for timber, for the gates of the fortress of the temple, for the wall of the city, and for his home. When I read that at first, I was a little disappointed. Why does he ask for himself? This must have been his family home in a state which was obviously in a state of disrepair now. But here is a leader who sacrificed a lot. He worked very hard and gave up a big position to take a huge risk for the gospel. But he did not neglect his own needs. There are many bitter children and bitter spouses today whose parents or spouses didn't think of the home when they served God. And, it's difficult. That's the balanced life. It's easy to do one or the other. Sometimes when I talk about this, some people come and say, our pastor is always thinking only about his family. He doesn't do his work because he says he has his responsibility. Family comes first, he says. The balanced life is tough. Doing both is tough. For many of us, the balanced life is our cross. And sometimes we are very tired when a child comes and asks us to take him somewhere. The last thing we want to do is to go out again. But we do it And we don't do it grudgingly, but do it as a great opportunity to fulfill our ambition to make love our aim. So when we do things like this, we are fulfilling our ambition. Sometimes we can't do it because of practical reasons. And at such times we don't say, don't you realize I have the work of God to do? But rather, oh, I'm so sorry I can't do it. I wish I could have come. And we call to say, how are things going? So sorry I couldn't come. Then they are not angry with the ministry and the work that we do. So here was a person who sacrificed a lot, but who also cared for his own health, his own welfare. Well, the king grants the request. Not only that, he gives him a military escort. And in verse 10, we have the first signs of opposition. We are going to talk about that next time. And it's going to intensify with time. But we come to verse 11, where he has now arrived in Jerusalem. So he says, and I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. He has taken a rest for 3 days. The journey must have been a long journey, must have been difficult. And so he just stopped and took a rest. Passionate people desperately need rest. Otherwise, they're going to burn out. God knows the human constitution when he decreed the day of rest in every 7 days. The British former Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, called it the first worker protection act in the history of the human race, saying that people need to take a Sabbath. Burnout, of course, is not caused by hard work, but it's more caused by insecurity. Insecure people are so driven that they work to overcome their insecurity by success. And they are uneasy with doing nothing. It's difficult for them to just sit and do nothing. Sabbath is an affirmation that God and not us is the one who does the work. So we must stop our work sometime, trusting in God to work, even though we are not working. It's an act of faith. And that is what it means to be secure in God. So we conscientiously slot rest and Sabbath into our schedules. And we try not to break our schedule, our Sabbath. Very often people ask me, can you come and speak there? And it's on my rest day. And I don't tell them it's my rest day because they will misunderstand. People don't have much of a concept of Sabbath in Sri Lanka. So I tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not free that day. And it's the truth. And, but whatever it is, to make sure that we take our rest. And then, verses 12 to 16, he gets to know the ground situation. Then I rose in the night, I and a few with me. He says, I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no, so he hasn't told the people why he has come. But he has a few people whom he's able to share, who are his colleagues, who are his team. And we all need people with whom we can share our dreams. Good leaders communicate their vision to a few people who will become their loyal colleagues. If you don't share, you won't develop leaders, and you'll have to recruit people from outside by advertising to get them to join your project. I mean, that's not wrong, but how much better if we could grow our own leaders. And so he does that, and then he goes on an inspection tour. We come to verse 13. I went out by night, by the valley gate, to the dragon spring, and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down, and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went to the fountain gate, and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall. And I turned back and entered the valley gate and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. And I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. He first had to know the facts before he could face the people. Again, he's not in a hurry. They need to be well prepared. People could ask questions. People could object. And if you are not aware of the facts, the project could flounder along the way. You know, some visionary leaders go from project to project. They get this great idea. And, they go gung-ho on this project. A year or two later, it's dropped. And then they start a new project. And these highly pragmatic projects generally attract wealthy donors who also like pragmatic projects. And so they are very impressed and they keep giving. And what a waste of God's resources. Those working in this group who are working for these projects could end up getting highly demotivated. Here we started this and that had to be stopped. Started the other, had to be stopped. We worked so hard for this leader and it's all stopping halfway. So we first need to get our facts straight and to take our time to be thorough, and because we are in it for the long haul. Of course, when there are emergencies, we can't do that. When there's a tsunami or an earthquake, you need capable people to help you. People who are planned, who know how to do situations like this, to help you to go and work. So that's a different situation. Now we come to verse 17. Then I said to them, see the trouble. You see the trouble we are in. How Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates are burnt. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. A well-informed Nehemiah now goes before the people. And the people could have got used to the status quo. And very often an outsider is needed to rouse them up. And he appeals to the shame of it. You know, people can get used to shameful things and not be too upset because they're used to it. It's the normal. And Nehemiah brings back that sense of shame. But he does so as an insider. So he says, you see the trouble we are in. If he just criticized, no one would have joined him. The poor state of things has made them objects of derision, he says, and shame. See, outsiders can wake up people who have got used to mediocrity, but they must first become insiders. I work for Youth for Christ, and we don't target church youth, we target youth who are outside the church. And then once they come to Christ, we send them to churches. And they are all on fire, new Christians on fire for the Lord. And some of them go and try to change the church in 3 months. And then they say, oh, these people don't understand us. They are not interested in change. But before you want to change an existing structure, you must become part of that structure. And of course, the thing that he appealed to was shame. Our mediocrity can dishonor God. And because we are God's people, we need to show these people afresh the shamefulness of the situation they are in. Today, people tolerate mediocrity. They tolerate haphazard programs. People are dying without Christ every day. And no one is coming to Christ through our ministries. And we say, oh, we have been faithful. We have done God's work faithfully. I think the word faithful has got some really bad press recently, because it's talking about people who are not very effective, but who do their work. We need to be constantly aware that somehow people have to be roused from their slumber to do something good for God, to do something great for God. I did my postgrad. I don't have a doctorate. I have a Master of Theology. And I did that at Fuller Seminary in New Testament. And it was a time when there were 4 giants of New Testament studies in the New Testament department. George Ladd, Ralph Martin, Everett Harrison, and Daniel Fuller. And I'll never forget George Ladd. He had grown up at a time when the evangelicals had just absolutely no influence upon the academy. And he went to Harvard. They got their PhDs. And they wanted to uphold the scriptures using brilliant scholarship. And he did that. He did that amazingly. He wrote the first major New Testament theology from an evangelical viewpoint that had come in many, many years. I still remember him. Sometimes somebody's reading something and it's bad scholarship, shoddy. And he would put his hand on his head and say, oh. He would be so upset when God's people were satisfied with poor quality. He had such a passion to bring honor to God's name. And that's something that we need to inculcate in our people. I tell our people in Youth for Christ, if you're not prepared, when you go for a meeting, you should be sent to prison. Because the greatest crime in the world is for God to be dishonored. And when we go unprepared, we dishonor God. Sometimes people come to our programs and end up feeling sorry for God, that this is the type of people who He has working for Him. So He appeals to the shame. Then verse 18, carefully He communicates. I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. Carefully he communicated this. First, he showed the need as an insider. Then he pointed to God being behind this. He didn't talk about the king's approval until later. First, God's being behind the project. And then he assured them of royal support. How important it is for a leader to communicate his or her vision to the people. Jesus did that 7 times. At least 7 times we have records of the Great Commission. Once each in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Twice in John. Once in the high priestly prayer. And the other time later on. And twice in Acts. One in chapter 1. And then when he's talking to Cornelius, Peter says, and he commanded us to go and talk about judgment to the people. So the 2 in John are similar. So there are, of the 7, 6 different statements, each focusing on some variety, on some aspect, in a way to motivate these people. In a short period of time, this is the work you are called to do. A key is to get them lift their eyes towards heaven and to remind them that God will see them through. We must of course communicate our vision attractively. Sometimes, when we announce something in church, we do it almost as if, we are doing a duty. This meeting is at this time, this meeting is at this time. And then no one comes to the meeting and we blame the people and say they are not committed. Often leaders are to blame because they have not fired the people. That's what we aim at, igniting our people. And if you're not passionate, it's very dangerous for the church. Some leaders do say only negative things. Why aren't you doing this? These are the rules of the church. You have to follow the rules. And there is no exciting vision. I think it's time for me to come out of the closet and tell you that I am a Methodist. And our church in Sri Lanka celebrated 200 years since the first missionaries came to Sri Lanka last year. Well, actually, we are just coming to the end of the celebration. And John Wesley has been a hero to me because I work with the poor just as he did. And I work with completely unchurched people, and he was able, through his community system, to develop mature Christians doing that. And he was also able to send people to have societal change. So in many ways, his community life, more than even his theology, his community life has been a model to me and has helped me a lot. And it was so sad to me when young people would come and say, "Oh, we are sick and tired of John Wesley." During this year, all the time people are talking about John Wesley, John Wesley. And I thought, I was so sad. Here's my hero, and these people are sick and tired of him. And then I realized, people without passion were talking about a person who burned with passion. And they communicated this passionless Christianity to the young people. It's so important that we present our passion to our people. If we are not passionate about our vision, we mustn't be leaders. We can do other things, but we cannot lead. But better still, let's go and battle with God until God comes to us and the passion returns. While I was at a meal with William Mackenzie from Christian Focus, he told me about somebody who had gone to his city and wept, and how that changed his ministry. Please come and tell me who that person is later on. Here's a person who had a normal ministry, and then he wept for his city, and passion returned. And so people without passion can restore that passion as they come close to the heart of God and finds that God's heart bleeds for his glory to be revealed on earth. And verse 18, the second part, says, they were strengthened for the good work. The old commentary by Kyle and Delish says, they vigorously set about the good work. A demotivated people have become people who work hard. They were once in shame, now they are motivated. You see the difference that leadership makes. In Sri Lanka, the government hospitals are very often, or sometimes, the wards are really bad, unclean, people are rude, and things like that. But you get some wards which are clean, the nurses and the attendants are very polite, and it's so pleasant to see that. I have a brother who's a doctor, and he told me the difference is leadership. If the doctor in charge of that ward is conscientious and wants a good ward, the people will follow that doctor's lead. Leaders must be visionaries, passionate about their task. How needed this is in Europe, in Sri Lanka, in Asia. You know, Romans 1:16 is still true. I am not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Thank goodness my mind has gone blank. Yes, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for salvation for everyone who has faith. I was teaching a Sunday school class while I was in America as a student, and I asked the young people, tell me, put this in your own language. What does it mean to be not ashamed of the gospel? And one girl said, I dig the gospel. You know, I dig the gospel. It's English idiom. And you know, the gospel continues to be great. The church may go through tough times, but the gospel is the Creator's message to the creation. And it's the only way the aspirations of all human beings can be fulfilled. We have to believe that. Every time we speak to someone, we tell ourselves, only God can truly satisfy that person. That's the confidence with which we go. And visionary leaders can ignite passion for renewal amongst the people. I hope that this conference will do that to Europe, to the European churches. Sometimes when I come here, People seem to be so overwhelmed by the huge challenges that they face. And they are huge. There is no doubt about it. But I don't know whether this is an English word. Even though they are huge, our God is huger. The gospel is greater. And that will keep propelling us, however difficult things are. The gospel is true. The great British evangelist, Gypsy Smith, he was converted in a gypsy tent, never went to school, preached the gospel for 87 years, for 70 years. He started preaching at 17 and preached till he was 87 years. Somebody asked him, what is the secret of your freshness and vigor? And he said, I never lost the wonder. There's a wonder about the gospel. We've been singing about it. There's a wonder. May we never lose that wonder. So leaders must burn with a passion over the task that God has given them. As you look at Nehemiah, you can see 5 P's that describe him. He was a person who penetrated. He spoke from the inside. He identified with the people. He was a praying person. He was a patient person. He was a passionate person. And he was a proficient or capable person. May God raise up such leaders in Europe. Let us pray. That is our prayer, our Father. Oh God, raise up people who have a glimpse, who have caught a glimpse of the glory of the gospel, that it's the power of God for the salvation of people who are your creation. And with that passion, may we become agents of renewal. For we know that renewal will come. We know that there has been an ebb and flow of your power at work in the church as we look at the history of the church. And that places that were once dark are once more ignited by the light that comes from the fire of people who have been filled with the Spirit. And may that be true of this group, O God. Fill us with your Spirit and help us to ignite a passion among our people. In Jesus' name we pray.